I think you've made a really important point there. And I think this is the problem we're up against is obviously because of, the way the media pushes down debate and how people are made fun of, that creates anger amongst those that obviously do have an alternative view. And the problem is that if that anger then gets expressed in a very unconstructive way, all it does is alienate people further.
Right.
It doesn't actually bring people into the debate. It just makes them think, whoa, this
not going there. Not going there, exactly.
Not going there.
No.
So, you're absolutely right. And I think there's a real responsibility of those that can see there is another side to everything that's going on to try to, as you say, is to, A, be informed, not just shout from a position of dogma. And what I have found is that obviously there are some people in, shall we say, the alternative world who actually haven't researched their information properly. And then, of course, what they're doing is just taking a position which is unfounded as the very people they're attacking. That's not helpful. You have to be informed. And then, as you said, you used that word, you need to be gentle. You need to gently offer an alternative view to people. And people are comfortable with that. They're okay with that. And this is when some kind of truth is revealed, because there is, I think, a collective consciousness. I think there's a lot of evidence of that. And deep in our hearts, we know when something is wrong. And what it just simply needs sometimes is for somebody to point out just one thing that they might not have noticed.
Yeah.
Now, for instance, go back to the Iraq War. In 2003, millions around the world took to the streets to make their feelings known that we shouldn't be going into Iraq, because they knew somewhere in their core being that the whole weapons of mass destruction scenario wasn't right. They felt it. They felt it wasn't right. Now, what happened there was, of course, in the end, it became revealed that indeed was the case, that these weapons weren't there. But that feeling was really important, because if you can then offer people data which they then can tune into themselves and then connect with that bit of them that doesn't feel right about the official story, they will be drawn to another viewpoint anyway. You don't need to force them there. And getting angry and getting dogmatic and frustrated because somebody won't listen to you often means that you haven't presented it in the right way to them.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, of course, there will always be some people you won't bring into your point of view, and that is also fine. People must choose.
Exactly.
They must choose. There must be choice, and if they choose a view that's not yours, you bless them with love and you move on and you talk to those who might listen elsewhere.
Well, exactly, because that has to do with something else as well. That has to do with the fact that you not come from a position where everyone else in the world has to think the same way as you do, in that sense, just because you have come to one conclusion. And maybe that also comes from a place of fear or insecurity in that sense, that it's not until other people around you believe what you do until it kind of really manifests, and it's a sign of weakness in my view, and it's another form of fascism actually, which many of these people also are trying to fight against. But let's leave that for now. That's a problematic area in that sense, and we know that that's going on. And I guess it all the point there is about the gentleness of approaching these things and have a humble approach to many of these topics as well. It's very, very important, and I'm glad that we got to talk about that. But I do want to talk about some of the things that you do bring up in the book as well. We talked briefly about 9/11, and I would not want to go into that whole thing right now in terms of the fact that there's not enough time to talk about that. That's one of the major conspiracies, and you dedicate a lot of pages to that in your book as well.
Yes.
7/7 taking place in London. July 2007. Maybe we can talk briefly about that, because that doesn't get as much coverage as 9/11 currently does. Maybe you can talk briefly about 7/7 for us, Andy, as well.
What is an interesting thing is that a lot of those here in Britain who are very happy to question 9/11 are much more uncomfortable about questioning 7/7. Now, that's not true for, shall we say, sort of the core alternative people, but there are some who don't want to believe that similar scenario could occur on their own shores. And, of course, the accusation, which some have made about 7/7, is that, either the bombers that we had were put up to it by shall we say, some shadowy intelligence force, or they were not even involved at all. I mean, there are many anomalies to do with who these people were, what trains they did or didn't catch, and there is a lot of research out there which seems to be very contradictory. And what some people feel is this shouldn't be the case. We should know exactly who they were. We should know exactly the trains they were on. There shouldn't be any confusion between the times. I mean, one of the central problems is the train that they allegedly were on didn't even run that morning. And the one that the government then corrected their story, but the one they said that they did catch, again, it doesn't actually tie in with the evidence. Plus you have video evidence of the bombers with time codes sort of removed and dates that seem to not be quite right. In other words, it doesn't seem like somebody's being entirely straight. And yet the bottom line is people died.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. People died, and with that, you are going to always have a very great sensitivity to anybody questioning the story. And this is where it's problematic, and it's used to stifle debate. And yet, what I find astonishing is it was announced on the very day by Peter Power, who was a security expert. He actually announced on a radio station that they were conducting exercises that very day on 7/7, which involved the scenario of bombs going off at the very stations, the very underground stations, that they did in fact go off on. Now, this seems like such a crucial piece of evidence, how that could have been spoken about on a radio interview,
yes,
and yet it's never been picked up properly in any inquiry or inquest or anything since, is beyond belief.
And it's amazing to me that is even allowed to be mentioned, if you know what I mean. If there was a secret training program going on, it's almost like let's tell them, but let's not make it too big in that sense. You know, it's almost about that aspect of the participatory occult ritual here. Let's do it to them, but then we tell them how it actually was done, but we don't highlight that too much. Or why do you think that was allowed to even be spoken about afterwards, Andy?
Well, I think it may well be that Peter Power was speaking out of turn because after following that interview, he suddenly became very reluctant to speak more of it. And it is quite possible, of course, that, those that were saying this weren't thinking at the time and they were told to shut up. Either way, you have to say, well, the fact that there were exercises dealing with that means that either those that did let the bombs off, either they thought they were dummy explosives and just thought that they were part of an exercise, or somebody knew that those exercises were going on, which meant that somebody leaked that information and therefore used it to plant real bombs. But either way, you have a scenario which is more than what we are being told.
Yeah.
And what I say in the book, and I think there's a truth to this, is it's a much less clear-cut case than 9/11, because 9/11 was very visible. Everybody can watch the footage of the towers collapsing. Everybody can see for themselves photos of the size of the hole in the Pentagon, etc. The problem with 7/7 is so much of it happened underground, off-camera. The small bits of security footage we've been shown don't reveal too much. It's very hard to get an absolute vision of what's going on. And there are those that claim if you looked at the damage inside carriages, for instance, that it looked almost as if the explosions had come up from beneath the floor.
Right.
As opposed to, from above, which you would imagine if it was a backpack exploding. So, these are the kinds of anomalies that trouble people very, very deeply, but it's very hard to get to the bottom of. But, obviously the main accusation is that some power that be arranged it again to create more fear, terror, to create a 9/11 type scenario in Britain, to keep everybody on their toes and keep the war on terror and all the subsequent control and surveillance alive. And certainly, even if it was a genuine attack, the fact is it certainly achieved that.
Exactly, and what we can say is that all these things are, as you rightly mentioned, are tied in as well. They're designed to keep one agenda going, and these things have been popping up in minor things all over the place. I guess what I'd like to ask you a little bit about, if you have any input on that at all, is actually the recent the Polish flight, the so-called accident when almost the entire Polish president and his administration goes under, and I think they crashed in Russia, if I remember